The maintenance bay at Nelly's Air Force Base hummed with the usual symphony of hydraulic lifts and pneumatic tools, but Senior Airman Kaya Ghost Voss worked in silence. Her weathered hands moved with practiced precision across the F-35's avionics console, replacing damaged circuits with the methodical grace of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. The other techs barely acknowledged her presence. The quiet woman who showed up early, left late, and never complained about the assignments nobody else wanted. She had been invisible for 3 years now, ever since the incident that grounded her permanently. The official record was sealed, but whispers followed her through the corridors like shadows. Some said she had frozen up during a classified mission over Syria. Others claimed she had disobeyed direct orders. The truth, as always, was more complicated than the stories people told themselves to sleep better at night. Kaya's fingers paused over a particular circuit board, its surface scarred by what looked like electromagnetic damage. Strange. This aircraft had supposedly been on routine training flights only. She frowned, tracing the burn patterns that spoke of high-energy weapons discharge, patterns she recognized from a different life, when she had been the one in the cockpit instead of on the ground with grease under her fingernails. The console flickered to life under her touch, systems initializing with electronic chirps and beeps that sounded almost relieved. She ran the diagnostic sequence, watching streams of code cascade across the screen. Everything looked normal until the communications array came online. A voice crackled through the speakers, distorted by static but unmistakably clear. "Phoenix Base, this is Saber Shadow requesting immediate assistance. I am 20 miles southwest of your position with critical engine failure and hostile contacts closing fast. Phoenix Base, do you copy?" Kaya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She knew that call sign. She knew it because it had been hers, before the world went to hell and took her wings with it. Saber Shadow had been officially retired, along with her commission as a combat pilot. The voice on the radio was impossible. It was her own voice, calling from somewhere in the Nevada desert where no training exercises were scheduled. She looked around the maintenance bay. The other technicians continued their work, oblivious to the transmission that had just shattered 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy. Either the console was malfunctioning in ways that defied electronic logic, or something was happening out there in the vast emptiness beyond the base perimeter that shouldn't exist. Kaya reached for the radio with trembling fingers, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The desert wind howled across the tarmac as Colonel Marcus Webb strode toward the maintenance hangar, his face carved from granite and 40 years of military decisions that kept him awake at night. 2 MPs flanked him, their hands resting casually on sidearms that had never been drawn in anger but gleamed with the promise of violence. Behind them, a civilian in an expensive suit picked his way carefully across the oil-stained concrete, briefcase clutched like a shield against the organized chaos of military life. Webb had seen the maintenance logs. Senior Airman Voss had reported a communications anomaly in aircraft 64317, claiming to have received impossible transmissions on a dead frequency. Standard protocol demanded a psych eval and immediate suspension, but something in her report had triggered alarms at levels so far above his pay grade that men in suits started making phone calls at 3 in the morning. The civilian introduced himself as Dr. Richard Castellanos from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, though his eyes suggested classifications that went deeper than his business card implied. "Colonel, we need to speak with Airman Voss immediately. What she heard today wasn't a malfunction." Inside the hangar, Kaya knelt beside the F-35's open access panel, lost in the familiar meditation of troubleshooting electrical systems. She had always found peace in the logical flow of electrons through circuits, the binary certainty of systems that either worked or didn't. Unlike human relationships, machines didn't lie to you about their intentions. "Senior Airman Voss, Webb's voice carried the weight of inevitable bad news. She looked up to find herself surrounded by uniforms and suits, their faces wearing expressions she remembered from the day they grounded her. "Sir," she stood slowly, wiping her hands on a shop rag that had seen better decades. Dr. Castellano stepped forward, his voice carefully modulated to suggest calm reasonableness. "Airman Voss, I need you to tell me exactly what you heard on that radio." "I already filed my report, sir. Unauthorized transmission on frequency. Using your old call sign." The civilian's interruption hung in the air like smoke from a crashed aircraft. "Saber Shadow, a designation that was retired 3 years ago along with your flight status." Kaya's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir, someone was using my old call sign." "Someone," Dr. Castellanos repeated, studying her face with the intensity of a man reading hieroglyphs. "Or something. Tell me, Airman Voss, what do you know about temporal displacement experiments?" The question hit her like turbulence at 30,000 feet, unexpected and disorienting. She glanced at Colonel Webb, looking for some anchor of familiar military procedure, but found only carefully maintained neutrality. "Nothing, sir," she replied, though her voice carried the slight tremor of someone who suspected they were about to learn more than they wanted to know. Dr. Castellanos nodded as if her ignorance had been expected. 3 days ago, we lost an F-35 during a classified test flight over the Nevada test range. The pilot was presumed killed when the aircraft simply vanished from radar. No debris field, no emergency beacon, no trace. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a personnel file that Kaya recognized even upside down. Her own face stared back at her from a photograph taken in happier days, when she had worn pilot's wings instead of maintenance stripes. The pilot was Captain Kaya Voss, call sign Saber Shadow. The maintenance bay fell silent except for the distant hum of generators and the whisper of desert wind through open hangar doors. Kaya stared at the impossible file, her mind struggling to process information that violated every law of physics and military logic she thought she understood. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm right here. I've been grounded for 3 years." Dr. Castellanos studied her with the clinical detachment of someone accustomed to dealing with impossible things. "Are you?" "According to our records, Captain Voss volunteered for the Kronos project 6 months ago. She was selected based on her exceptional performance record and her experience with classified aircraft systems." Colonel Webb shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face reflecting the strain of trying to reconcile contradictory realities. "Sir, with respect, Senior Airman Voss has been assigned to maintenance duties since her flight status was revoked in 2022. I have 3 years of duty rosters to prove it." "Colonel, what if I told you that both of those things could be true?" Dr. Castellanos closed the file and returned it to his briefcase with deliberate precision. "What if the woman standing in front of us represents one timeline, while another version of herself volunteered for an experiment that split her existence across multiple probability states?" Kaya's legs felt weak. She reached for the workbench behind her, fingers clutching cold metal as her world tilted on its axis. "You're talking about science fiction. 3 years ago, you experienced what the official report calls temporal displacement during a classified mission over Syria. The incident that grounded you wasn't pilot error or insubordination. You disappeared for 4 minutes and 17 seconds, then reappeared with no memory of where you had been. We buried it because we didn't understand what had happened." The desert wind gusted through the hangar, stirring papers and carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a jet engine spooled up for takeoff, its rising whine a familiar song of departure that made Kaya's chest ache with remembered freedom. "Now we know," Dr. Castellanos continued. "You weren't just displaced in space. You were displaced in time, and the echo of that displacement is still rippling through reality. The Captain Voss who volunteered for Kronos was you, from a timeline where that displacement never resulted in your grounding, where you continued flying missions that shaped the course of history itself. Kaya closed her eyes, trying to steady herself against the vertigo of infinite possibility. The secure briefing room deep beneath Nellie's Air Force Base felt like a tomb lined with classified secrets and fluorescent lighting. Kaya sat at a polished table that reflected her face like a dark mirror, surrounded by officers whose rank insignia glittered with the weight of decisions that reshaped nations. Dr. Castellanos had shed his civilian facade, revealing the bearing of someone who had worn a uniform long before he learned to hide it beneath expensive suits. General Patricia Hawkins, commander of Air Combat Command, studied the assembled files with the patience of someone who had learned to distrust first impressions. Dr. Castellanos explained to me how we lost a pilot who is currently sitting in this room. Ma'am, the Kronos project was designed to test temporal manipulation technology recovered from the 2019 incident in Syria, the same incident that originally affected then-Captain Voss. He activated a holographic display that painted the room in blue light and impossible geometries. What we discovered is that time isn't linear. It branches, creating parallel timelines where different choices lead to different outcomes. Kaya watched mathematical equations flow across the projection like electronic blood through digital veins. The Syrian incident, she said quietly. I remember the mission briefing, reconnaissance of suspected weapons facility. But when I got there, she paused, struggling with memories that felt simultaneously crystal clear and completely alien. When you got there, Captain, you encountered technology that shouldn't exist, a device that manipulates the quantum substrate of reality itself. Your aircraft was caught in its field effect, which scattered your consciousness across multiple timeline branches. General Hawkins leaned forward. Are you telling me that we have multiple versions of Captain Voss operating in parallel realities? Yes, ma'am. And 3 days ago, one of those versions agreed to test our prototype temporal navigation system. She was attempting to establish controlled contact between timeline branches when she vanished. The room fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant rumble of aircraft operations far above their heads. Kaya stared at her reflection in the table, seeing not one face but infinite variations, versions of herself who had made different choices, lived different lives, died different deaths. Why are you telling me this? She asked. I'm just a maintenance tech now. Dr. Castellanos smiled with the sadness of someone who had learned that truth was more complicated than anyone wanted to believe. Because, Senior Airman Voss, you're the only person who can find her. Your quantum signature is identical. You can navigate the timeline branches because you've already done it once, even if you don't remember how. Colonel Webb, who had remained silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. Sir, with respect, you're asking a grounded pilot to fly an experimental aircraft into science fiction. I'm asking her to save herself, Dr. Castellanos replied, and possibly prevent a catastrophic cascade failure that could unravel our entire timeline. Through the reinforced concrete walls, Kaya could feel the desert calling. The experimental aircraft designated Wraith sat in Hangar 18 like a fever dream given form and function. Its angular surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating the unsettling impression that she was looking at a hole cut in the shape of an aircraft. Kaya walked slowly around its perimeter, her maintenance-trained eyes cataloging details that violated everything she thought she knew about aerodynamics and engineering. It's beautiful, she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. 3 years of grease and hydraulic fluid hadn't killed the pilot in her soul, only buried it beneath layers of resignation and carefully managed disappointment. Dr. Castellanos emerged from beneath the aircraft's belly, diagnostic tablet in hand and excitement, barely contained behind his professional facade. The Wraith incorporates technology reverse-engineered from the Syrian device. Instead of scattering consciousness randomly across timelines, it allows controlled navigation through quantum probability space. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior maintenance supervisor, shook his head with the weary skepticism of someone who had seen too many experimental aircraft turn into expensive fireworks. "Sir, with respect, this thing has more experimental systems than a prototype should have. The quantum field generator alone has been tested extensively in controlled environments," Dr. Castellanos interrupted. "What we need now is a pilot with the unique neurological pathways created by previous temporal displacement, someone whose brain has been rewired by quantum exposure." Kaya reached out to touch the aircraft's surface, her palm meeting material that felt warm despite the hangar's chill. "You're asking me to fly blind into something that might not exist, to rescue someone who might be me but isn't me, using technology that shouldn't work." "Yes." The simplicity of his answer cut through weeks of briefings and technical explanations and psychological evaluations. "Yes. Fly into the impossible and bring herself home." "Ma'am," Chief Rodriguez said quietly, "you don't have to do this. You've got a good position here, steady work, respect among the crew. Why risk it all for something that might be a suicide mission?" Kaya looked up at the hangar's vast ceiling, where shadows played among the structural beams like memories of aircraft that had once called this place home. How could she explain that 3 years of safety had felt like 3 years of slow suffocation? That every night she dreamed of sky and speed, and the particular kind of freedom that only came at 30,000 feet. "Because," she said finally, "somewhere out there is a version of me who still believes in impossible things, and maybe she's learned something I need to know." The pre-flight checklist for the X-47C filled 17 pages with systems that had no civilian equivalent and warnings written in the careful language of engineers, who understood exactly how many ways their creation could kill its pilot. Kaya strapped herself into the ejection seat, her hands moving through startup procedures with muscle memory that bridged the gap between her grounded present and her flying past. "Wraith Control, this is Saber Shadow requesting pre-flight systems check." The radio crackled with static that seemed to carry whispers from other timelines. "Saber Shadow, Wraith Control copies, all systems showing green. Quantum field generator spooled and ready for activation. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. You are cleared for temporal displacement on your discretion." Through the cockpit canopy, she could see Dr. Castellanos and his team gathered around monitoring stations that tracked variables with no names in any language. Colonel Webb stood at the observation window, his face reflecting the weight of sending someone into an experiment that existed at the bleeding edge of theoretical physics. "Saber Shadow, be advised," came another voice on the radio, General Hawkins herself, calling from the command bunker. "You are authorized to abort this mission at any time. Your primary objective is to locate and establish contact with the displaced Captain Voss. Secondary objective is to gather intelligence on timeline branch navigation. Tertiary objective is to return home safely. Priority order is non-negotiable." Kaya smiled despite herself. Even when dealing with impossible science, the military found ways to make it sound like standard operating procedure. "Wraith Control, Saber Shadow copies all, initiating quantum field activation." The world changed. Not visually. The hangar still surrounded her, the desert still stretched beyond the open doors, but something fundamental shifted in the quality of light and shadow and possibility. Reality became negotiable, offering alternatives that whispered at the edges of perception. "Field activation complete," she reported, her voice steady despite the fact that her instruments now showed readings for variables that hadn't existed an hour ago. "Beginning temporal displacement in 3, 2, 1. She pressed the throttle forward, and the X-47C Wraith carried her not just through space, but through the spaces between worlds where lost pilots waited for someone to find them and bring them home. The quantum field wrapped around Kaya like liquid starlight, transforming the familiar desert landscape into something that might have been painted by someone who had only heard colors described in a foreign language. The Wraith's engine sang with harmonics that her bones felt before her ears heard, propelling her through skis that held 3 different suns and cast shadows in directions that hurt to contemplate. Wraith control, Saber shadow, she transmitted, though her radio now carried her voice across dimensions instead of radio waves. Temporal displacement confirmed. I am somewhere else. The response came through layers of static and quantum interference. Saber shadow, copy, displacement, readings nominal. Below her, the Nevada desert stretched in directions that included diagonal and inward, dotted with structures that existed in this timeline but not in hers. Missile silos arranged in patterns that spoke of a Cold War that had turned hot. Cities where none should be, their lights spelling out messages in languages she almost recognized. And overhead, aircraft that moved with the predatory grace of fighters designed by minds that understood physics differently. Her instruments detected energy signatures consistent with another Wraith-class aircraft bearing southeast at high altitude. The quantum signature matched her own so perfectly that for a moment she wondered if she was tracking her own reflection across dimensional barriers. Saber shadow to unknown aircraft, she transmitted on the experimental frequency Dr. Castellanos had insisted would work across timeline branches. Identify yourself. The response nearly stopped her heart. This is Captain Kaya Voss, call sign Saber Shadow, requesting immediate assistance. My aircraft has sustained critical damage and I am being pursued by hostile forces. Please state your identity and intentions. Hearing her own voice across impossible distances felt like listening to a recording of words she had never spoken. Captain, this is Saber Shadow from Baseline Timeline. I'm here to bring you home. Silence stretched across quantum frequencies until she began to wonder if the transmission had failed. Then, Baseline Timeline, you mean, you're me, from before the Chronos mission. From a timeline where you were grounded 3 years ago instead of continuing active flight status. Dr. Castellanos sent me to find you. Castellanos, the other Kaya said, and her voice carried exhaustion that spoke of battles fought in places that didn't exist. He never mentioned that extraction was possible. How long have I been missing? 3 days baseline time, but judging by your voice, you've been living a lot longer than that. The radio crackled with something that might have been bitter laughter. Try 3 years. I've been jumping between timelines, trying to prevent something called the Cascade event. And I think I finally understand what's going to cause it. Kaya's blood turned cold in ways that had nothing to do with altitude. What kind of event? The kind that unravels every timeline simultaneously. Through the Wraith's quantum-enhanced sensors, Kaya detected massive energy signatures closing on their position, aircraft that moved with the coordinated precision of hunters who had been tracking this particular prey for longer than any pilot should have to endure. The other Saber Shadow was running out of time, space, and options in a desert that existed sideways to reality. I have multiple bogies closing on our position, the other Kaya transmitted, her voice tight with the controlled fear of someone who had been running too long. 8. No, 12 contacts. They're not showing on conventional radar, but my quantum sensors are painting them clear as daylight. Kaya banked the Wraith toward the energy signatures, her training asserting itself despite the impossible circumstances. What are we looking at, Captain? Timeline enforcement units. Think of them as antibodies, the universe's way of preventing paradoxes that could destabilize the quantum foundation of reality. They've been hunting me ever since I started jumping between branches. Through her canopy, Kaya caught sight of the pursuing aircraft, and her breath caught in her throat. They moved like living things, their surfaces shifting and flowing as if they were made of liquid metal given flight. No visible wings or control surfaces, yet they banked and rolled with the fluid grace of predators born in an environment where physics were merely suggestions. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They're killers," the other Kaya replied grimly. "And they don't distinguish between timelines when they decide something needs to be erased. If they catch us, both our realities get classified as contamination zones." The first missile launched from the lead enforcement unit, its exhaust trail scribing equations of destruction across the quantum-distorted sky. Kaya threw the Wraith into evasive maneuvers that would have torn apart any conventional aircraft, relying on the craft's temporal field generators to slide between the spaces where explosions could exist. "Break right," the other Kaya called. "Their targeting systems lock onto quantum signatures, not visual acquisition. You need to randomize your temporal phase." Kaya's hands moved across controls that had no names, adjusting variables that existed in the gaps between mathematics and faith. The world flickered around her like a damaged television signal, each flicker carrying her through microseconds of different possibility. "How long have you been fighting these things?" she called over the radio as another missile streaked past close enough to paint her canopy with exotic radiation. "Long enough to know we can't win by running. There's something I need to show you, something Dr. Castellanos didn't put in the briefings. But first we need to lose these enforcement units, and I know exactly how to do it." The other Kaya's aircraft suddenly inverted and dove toward what looked like empty desert. But Kaya's quantum sensors detected something else entirely. A massive gravitational anomaly that twisted spacetime like water flowing down an invisible drain. "Follow me," came the transmission. "And whatever you do, don't look directly at the event horizon." They dove together into impossibility, two versions of the same pilot flying toward their own reflection in the abyss. The gravitational anomaly swallowed them like a mouth made of bent spacetime and twisted light. Kaya felt the Wraith's quantum field generators strain against forces that wanted to stretch her aircraft across several dimensions simultaneously, while outside her canopy, the desert floor approached at angles that shouldn't exist in any geometry she had studied. "Stay tight on my wing," the other Kaya called over radio frequencies that now carried overtones of cosmic radiation. "The temporal shear is strongest at the event horizon. If we hit it just right, we can use it to slingshot across multiple timeline branches simultaneously." The enforcement units followed them into the dive, their liquid metal forms reshaping themselves for pursuit through gravitational fields that would have crushed conventional aircraft into exotic matter. They moved with the patient determination of forces of nature, as inevitable as entropy and twice as hungry. "Now," the other Kaya shouted. Both Wraith aircraft hit the anomaly's event horizon at precisely the same instant, their quantum fields synchronizing in a harmony that made the universe ring like a struck bell. Reality fractured around them in patterns too complex for human perception, showing glimpses of timelines where the Cold War had ended differently, where humanity had never learned to fly, where the desert beneath them was an ocean filled with creatures that dreamed of electric stars. The enforcement units, caught off guard by the synchronized breach, scattered across probability space like pool balls after a perfect break. Their perfect coordination broken, they became individual hunters instead of a unified force, still dangerous, but no longer inevitable. "Temporal slingshot successful," the other Kaya reported as they emerged from the anomaly into a timeline where the sky was the color of old brass, and the sun cast shadows that moved independently of their objects. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they reacquire our signatures." Kaya checked her instruments, trying to process readings that described their location in terms of when rather than where. "Captain, you said there was something Dr. Castellanos didn't put in the briefings." "There's a reason the enforcement units want me stopped," the other Kaya replied. "And it's not because I'm jumping between timelines. It's because of what I discovered while I was jumping." She transmitted a data packet across quantum frequencies, filling Kaya's consciousness with information that arrived as direct experience rather than mere knowledge. Images flooded her awareness, hidden facilities in the Nevada desert that existed in every timeline but appeared on no maps. Scientists working with technology that predated human civilization by millions of years. And at the center of it all, a device that looked exactly like the one she had encountered over Syria 3 years ago. The Syrian facility was never about weapons, the other Kaya continued. It was about temporal archaeology. Someone has been seeding these devices across multiple timelines, creating anchor points that allow controlled manipulation of historical events. The Chronos project wasn't testing our technology, it was testing us. The implications hit Kaya like turbulence at 30,000 feet, sudden and disorienting. Testing us for what? To see if we were ready to become temporal operatives. The incident that grounded you, that was supposed to be your recruitment. When you didn't volunteer for the program, they found a version of you who would. Through the brass-colored sky, Kaya could see storm clouds gathering on the temporal horizon. Not weather, but probability storms where conflicting timelines scraped against each other like tectonic plates. Each lightning flash revealed glimpses of other realities where other versions of herself made other choices. The truth was bigger than one pilot, one timeline, one universe. And somewhere in the hidden facilities that existed between moments, people with technology beyond human comprehension were playing games with causality itself. "We need to get home," Kaya said quietly. "People need to know." "That's the problem," the other Kaya replied. "Home might not exist anymore." In the distance, temporal enforcement units began to coalesce from quantum foam. Their hunt resumed with mechanical patience. But now Kaya understood what they were really protecting, and why they considered her existence a threat to the ordered flow of predetermined history. The coordinates the other Kaya transmitted led them to a section of desert that existed in a probability fold between several timelines, a place that was simultaneously in Nevada, Syria, and somewhere else entirely. As they descended through atmospheric layers that tasted of copper and ozone, Kaya saw structures that hurt to look at directly, their architecture following principles that human minds weren't designed to comprehend. "Welcome to Facility Omega," the other Kaya said over the radio, her voice carrying 3 years of exhaustion and terrible knowledge. "This is where it all started, and where it's all going to end if we don't do something about it." The facility stretched across the desert floor like a circuit board designed by angels with a malicious sense of humor. Towers spiraled upward in helical patterns that suggested DNA made of metal and crystallized time, while beneath the surface, Kaya's sensors detected vast chambers that extended downward further than seemed geometrically possible. They landed on a platform that materialized beneath their aircraft as they approached, the surface shifting from empty air to solid metal, with the casual disregard for physics that characterized everything about this place. The other Kaya's aircraft bore scars from 3 years of temporal warfare, burn marks that suggested weapons fire from multiple timelines, and patches that might have been repairs or might have been the aircraft healing itself. As they shut down their engines, Kaya got her first clear look at the other version of herself through the cockpit glass. She looked older, harder, with eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. The uniform was right, the face was identical, but something fundamental had changed in the way she carried herself, as if she had learned that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than anyone wanted to believe. "The facility operates on multiple temporal phases simultaneously," the other Kaya explained as they walked toward an entrance that opened like a flower made of liquid metal. "Past, present, and future exist here as spatial dimensions rather than sequential experiences. Try not to think about it too hard. Temporal vertigo is a real thing." Inside, the corridors stretched in directions that included yesterday and next Thursday. Personnel moved past them wearing uniforms from military organizations that didn't exist in Kaya's timeline. their faces marked by the careful neutrality of people who had learned to accept impossible things as routine occupational hazards. "How long has this been going on?" Kaya asked, trying not to stare as a technician walked through a wall that existed only on Tuesdays. "Depends on your frame of reference," the other Kaya replied. "The facility has been here for 67 years, 15 minutes, and approximately 3 million years, depending on which temporal coordinate system you're using. The technology predates human civilization, but the people running it are definitely contemporary." They entered a control room that monitored activities across what appeared to be hundreds of timeline branches simultaneously. Wall-mounted displays showed probability cascades, temporal flux readings, and surveillance footage from realities where history had taken different turns. In one monitor, Kaya watched a version of herself that had never learned to fly, working as a librarian in a world where the Wright brothers had given up after their first crash. "Dr. Castellanos," the other Kaya called to a figure hunched over a control station. "I brought backup." The man who turned to face them wore Dr. Castellanos' face, but his eyes held knowledge that belonged to someone much older. "Ah, the baseline version, right on schedule. I trust the flight was educational." "Enlightening," Kaya replied carefully, "and probably illegal in most timelines." His smile contained no warmth. "Legality is a local phenomenon, Saber Shadow. What matters is stability." Through the facility's impossible geometry, Kaya could feel something vast and patient watching their conversation with interest that felt distinctly non-human. Whatever games were being played here, the stakes were higher than one pilot, one timeline, or one species. Dr. Castellanos led them deeper into Facility Omega, through corridors where past and future existed as adjacent rooms accessible through doors marked with symbols that predated human language. In one room, Kaya glimpsed technicians working with devices that looked familiar, identical to the quantum field generators in the Wraith aircraft. But these versions were clearly prototypes, their surfaces rough with the marks of rapid fabrication. "The Kronos project was never about navigation," Dr. Castellanos explained as they walked past laboratories where impossible experiments generated results that violated causality with bureaucratic thoroughness. "It was about recruitment. We needed pilots with quantum-altered neurological pathways, people whose consciousness had been scattered across multiple timelines and reassembled." "Recruited for what?" Kaya asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. "For the only military operation that matters," he replied, stopping before a massive door marked with warnings in 17 languages, 3 of which hadn't been invented yet. "The war for temporal independence." Beyond the door lay a briefing room that existed in several dimensions simultaneously, its walls displaying tactical information from conflicts that spanned multiple timelines. Star charts showed the positions of fleets that sailed through spacetime instead of space, while tactical displays tracked the movements of forces that existed in the gaps between seconds. "6 months ago, we detected an incursion," Dr. Castellanos began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering a briefing that would reshape the listener's understanding of everything they thought they knew. "Entities from a timeline so far removed from our local cluster that they don't share our fundamental physical constants. They exist in the quantum foam between realities, and they've been systematically destabilizing alternate timelines to create expansion space for their own reality matrix." The other Kaya stepped forward, her face grim. "The enforcement units aren't protecting timeline integrity. They're advanced scouts, cataloging which realities are worth preserving and which can be sacrificed to make room for the invaders." "And the Syrian facility?" Kaya asked, though she was beginning to understand. "Bait," Dr. Castellanos replied. "We've been seeding quantum anchor points across multiple timelines, creating a detection grid that would let us track incursion activity. Your encounter 3 years ago was the first successful test of human quantum interface technology." The briefing room's displays shifted to show probability maps that resembled weather patterns in hell. Vast storm systems of unstable causality swept across the timeline clusters, leaving behind regions where cause and effect operated according to alien mathematics. The baseline timeline, your timeline, is scheduled for integration in 72 hours, Dr. Castellanos continued. Unless we can mount a coordinated defense across multiple probability branches, your reality will be absorbed into theirs, and everyone you've ever known will become quantum footnotes in an alien history. Kaya stared at the tactical displays, trying to process the scale of what she was being told. You're asking me to fight a war across multiple timelines against enemies I can't see to defend a reality I'm not sure exists. I'm asking you to be what you were trained to be, the other Kaya said quietly. A pilot. The universe is bigger than any of us imagine, but the principles remain the same. Identify the target, maintain formation, complete the mission. Through the facility's walls, Kaya could feel something vast and patient shifting, its attention toward their conversation, as if their words were being weighed against criteria that existed outside human comprehension. The war room's holographic displays painted the air with light that hurt to look at directly, showing tactical situations across probability spaces where military strategy had to account for enemies that could attack from yesterday or retreat into next Tuesday. Kaya studied the data streams, her pilot's mind automatically processing the three-dimensional chess game of temporal warfare. Our primary objective, Dr. Castellanos continued, manipulating the display to show fleet movements through spacetime, is to establish defensive positions at key quantum junction points. Think of them as strategic high ground that exists in multiple timelines simultaneously. The other Kaya pointed to a cluster of red indicators converging on what the display labeled as Timeline Cluster Alpha 7. That's your baseline reality. The incursion force is already positioning for integration. They'll start by destabilizing the quantum foundations of your timeline, making reality negotiable. Then they'll begin the absorption process. How long do we have? Kaya asked, though she was beginning to understand that time was a more complicated concept than she had ever imagined. In baseline terms, approximately 68 hours, but they're attacking from multiple temporal vectors simultaneously, so the assault will appear to happen all at once from your perspective. Dr. Castellanos highlighted probability cascades that looked like hurricanes made of mathematics. The good news is that we've been preparing for this for 3 years across 47 different timeline branches. The bad news is that we're outnumbered by entities that don't exist in any way we can meaningfully comprehend. A new voice entered the conversation from speakers that materialized from quantum foam as needed. Dr. Castellanos, we have confirmation of Phase 1 deployment. Temporal enforcement units are being withdrawn from patrol sectors and redirected to integration zones. The other Kaya's face went pale.